All right, let's dive into the world of cells.
The fundamental units of life.
It's like a biology crash course, right?
Absolutely. We're going deep into prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells.
Two main types, but what's the biggest difference between them?
The nucleus, or lack thereof.
Okay, so eukaryotic cells have a nucleus,
Yeah, think of it as a well-organized control center.
and prokaryotic cells.
They don't have that central nucleus. Their DNA is just kind of floating around.
So eukaryotic cells are more like a city with a city hall.
And prokaryotic cells are more like a small town.
Got it. So eukaryotic cells are more complex.
Definitely. And they're also much bigger.
So let's zoom into a eukaryotic cell. What are some of the key features?
Well, first you have the nucleus, which we already mentioned.
Right, the control center.
And it has these little gateways called nuclear pores.
Pores.
Yeah, they allow things to move in and out of the nucleus.
So it's not completely sealed off?
Nope. Things like messenger RNA or mRNA exit through those pores.
mRNA. That's involved in making proteins, right?
You got it. DNA holds the blueprints, but mRNA carries specific instructions to the ribosomes,
Ribosome.
the protein factories of the cell.
So the ribosomes read the mRNA instructions and build proteins.
Exactly. And proteins are essential for almost everything the cell does.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, some ribosomes float around in the cytoplasm.
That's the jelly-like stuff inside the cell, right?
Yep. But many ribosomes are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum.
The ER. What's that?
Think of it as a network of interconnected factories and workshops.
So it's all about production.
You got it.
Hmm.
There's the rough ER, studded with ribosomes making proteins.
So that's where proteins are made and modified.
Exactly. And then there's the smooth ER.
What does that do?
It's more like a chemical processing plant.
Interesting. So it has different functions.
Yeah, things like synthesizing lipids and detoxifying harmful substances.
So the ER is a busy place.
For sure. But once the proteins are made in the ER...
They need to go somewhere.
Exactly. That's where the Golgi apparatus comes in. Think of it as the cell's post office or shipping center.
So it packages and sorts proteins.
Precisely. It receives proteins from the ER, packages them into vesicles,
Vesicles.
little membrane-bound sacs,
Oh, yeah.
and then sends them off to their final destinations.
So it's a complex sorting system.
Absolutely. Now, all of this activity requires a lot of energy.
Of course. Where does that energy come from?
The mitochondria, they're the powerhouses of the cell.
Right. They generate ATP.
Exactly. ATP is like the cell's energy currency.
It's how cells power all their activity.
Precisely. And did you know that mitochondria have their own DNA?
Really? Why is that?
It's thought that mitochondria were once free-living bacteria.
Wow. Like ancient bacteria.
Exactly. They were engulfed by early eukaryotic cells billions of years ago.
And they formed a partnership.
That's the idea. Over time, they became essential parts of the cell.
Amazing. So with all this activity, there must be some waste generated.
You're right. That's where lysosomes come in.
What are those?
They're like the cell's recycling and waste disposal units.
Interesting. So they break down cellular garbage
Yeah, they contain powerful enzymes to break down worn-out cell parts.
and even bacteria and viruses.
That's right. They can even digest those.
Wow. So they're pretty important for keeping the cell clean.
Absolutely. And we also have peroxisomes, which are like specialized detox units.
So they deal with specific types of waste.
Yeah, things like fatty acids and alcohol.
Got it. So the cell is really good at cleaning up after itself.
It is. Now, all of these components need some kind of structure to hold them together.
Right. What provides that structure?
The cytoskeleton. Think of it as the cell's internal scaffolding.
Ah, so it provides support and shape.
Exactly. And it's also involved in cell movement.
So it's kind of like the cell's highway system.
Yeah. And there are three main types of fibers: actin filaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules.
So it's a complex network.
It is. And finally, we have the centrosome, which is important for cell division.
Cell division. What does the centrosome do?
It helps organize those microtubules we talked about
Okay.
and plays a crucial role in separating chromosomes during cell division.
So it makes sure each new cell gets a complete set of genetic information.
Exactly. It's like a conductor making sure the orchestra is in tune.
This has been an amazing tour of the eukaryotic cell.
And we've just scratched the surface.
I know, it's mind-blowing how much is happening inside these tiny structures.
Right. Now, there are some key differences between plant and animal cells.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that. What are some of those differences?
Well, one of the most obvious is the cell wall.
The cell wall.
Yeah, plant cells have this rigid outer layer that gives them extra support.
Makes sense. Plants need to be strong to stand upright.
Exactly. And the cell wall is made of cellulose, which is a tough carbohydrate.
Interesting. So it's like a suit of armor for the plant cell?
It is. And then there are the chloroplasts.
Chloroplasts. Those are the things that make plants green,
Oh,
right?
you got it. They're the sites of photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis. That's how plants make food, using sunlight.
Precisely. They capture light energy and convert it into chemical energy.
Wow, so they're like tiny solar panels.
And like mitochondria, chloroplasts also have their own DNA.
Really? It seems like a lot of these cellular structures have their own DNA.
It is fascinating, isn't it? It points to this idea of endosymbiosis.
Endosymbiosis.
Yeah, the idea that these organelles were once free-living bacteria.
And they got absorbed into eukaryotic cells.
That's the theory. And over time, they became essential parts of the cell.
That's amazing. So plant cells have these unique features.
They do, and they also have these large central vacuoles.
Vacuoles, I remember learning about those in school.
They're like giant storage tanks for the cell.
They hold water and nutrients.
Exactly. And they also help maintain the cell's shape and turgor pressure.
Turgor pressure.
It's the pressure that keeps plants from wilting.
Got it. So plant cells have these special adaptations.
They do,
Yep.
but let's not forget about those simpler prokaryotic cells.
Right. We talked about them earlier. They're like those little villages.
Yep. They might be simpler, but they're incredibly important.
And they've been around for a long time.
Billions of years. They're a testament to the power of simplicity.
Okay, so we've explored eukaryotic cells, both plant and animal.
And we've touched on prokaryotic cells.
This has been a fascinating journey into the world of cells.
It really has. We've seen how these tiny units of life are incredibly complex and organized.
It's mind-boggling to think about all the activity happening inside them.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn.
Exactly. There's always more to discover about the wonders of biology.
That's the beauty of science. It's a never-ending journey of exploration.
Well said. To our listeners, keep that curiosity alive and keep exploring.
There's a whole universe waiting to be discovered, even within ourselves.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cells.
It's been a pleasure.
So those are some of the big differences between plant and animal cells.
They are.
And it makes sense, right? Plants need that extra support to stand tall and reach for the sun.
Exactly. That rigid cell wall is like a built-in scaffolding.
It's amazing how these tiny structures have evolved to meet the specific needs of each organism.
It really is. And speaking of adaptations, let's talk about those chloroplasts.
Oh yeah, those are the green powerhouses of plant cell.
Got it. They're the sites of photosynthesis.
Photosynthesis, the process that converts sunlight into energy.
Exactly. It's like magic, but it's science.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. Chloroplasts capture light energy using chlorophyll. That's what gives plants their green color.
Right. And then they use that energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose.
And glucose is like the plant's food. It's their energy source.
So they're basically making their own food from sunlight.
Exactly. It's an incredibly efficient system.
And I remember reading that chloroplasts, like mitochondria, also have their own DNA.
That's right. They have their own genetic material.
It's fascinating how these organelles have their own little set of blueprints.
It is. And it supports the theory of endosymbiosis.
Endosymbiosis.
Yeah, the idea that these organelles were once free-living bacteria.
Wow. So they were like independent organisms.
That's the idea. And at some point, they were engulfed by early eukaryotic cells.
And they formed this mutually beneficial relationship.
Exactly. They became part of the cell, but they still retained some of their own DNA.
So it's like a cellular merger that happened billions of years ago.
It is, and it's a testament to the power of cooperation in evolution.
It's incredible to think about the long history of life on Earth and how these tiny cells have played such a crucial role.
It really is humbling. Now, besides the cell wall and chloroplasts, plant cells also have these large central vacuoles.
Vacuoles, aren't those like storage compartments?
Exactly. They're like the cell's pantry, water tower, and recycling center all rolled into one.
Wow. So they're pretty versatile.
They are. They can store water, nutrients, pigments, and even waste products.
So they're essential for maintaining the cell's internal environment.
Precisely. And they also play a role in maintaining the cell's shape.
I've noticed that when I forget to water my plants, they start to wilt.
Exactly. That wilting is caused by a loss of turgor pressure.
Turgor pressure.
It's the pressure exerted by the fluid inside the vacuole against the cell wall.
Ah, so when the vacuole is full of water, it pushes against the cell wall, keeping the plant firm.
Exactly. And when the vacuole loses water, the turgor pressure drops and the plant wilts.
It's like a balloon. When you let the air out, it becomes floppy.
Perfect analogy. So those central vacuoles are pretty important for plant cells.
They are. We've talked a lot about eukaryotic cells, both plant and animal.
We have. It's amazing how much diversity there is within this one category of cells.
It is.
Oh,
But let's not forget about those simpler prokaryotic cells.
right. The tiny villages compared to the bustling cities of eukaryotic cells.
They may be small, but they're incredibly important.
Absolutely. They're the most abundant organisms on Earth.
And they play a vital role in many ecosystems.
They do. They're involved in nutrient cycling, decomposition, and even nitrogen fixation.
So even though they lack a nucleus and other organelles,
They're still able to carry out all the essential functions of life.
they're like the minimalist masters of the cellular world.
Exactly. They've streamlined their structure and function to be incredibly efficient.
It's fascinating how life can exist in such diverse forms.
It is. From the simplest prokaryotic cell to the most complex eukaryotic organism, there's a whole spectrum of life out there.
And we're still just scratching the surface of understanding it all.
That's what makes biology so exciting. There's always something new to discover.
It really is amazing how these prokaryotic cells can do so much with so little.
It is. They're a testament to the power of efficiency and adaptation.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the bustling cities of eukaryotic cells to the efficient villages of prokaryotic cells.
We have. It's been quite a journey through the microscopic world.
I feel like I've learned so much of the building blocks of life.
Me too. It's always fascinating to explore the intricate workings of cells.
And it makes you realize that even though they're tiny, they're incredibly complex and organized.
Absolutely. They're like miniature universes, each with its own set of rules and functions.
And they all work together to create the amazing diversity of life we see around us.
That's right. From the simplest bacteria to the most complex animals, it all starts with these tiny cells.
It's a reminder that we're all connected at the most fundamental level.
Exactly. And that there's still so much we don't know about these incredible building blocks of life.
That's what makes biology so fascinating. There's always more to discover.
Absolutely. And I encourage everyone to keep exploring and asking questions.
Curiosity is the key to unlocking the secrets of the natural world.
Well said. And who knows what amazing discoveries await us in the future.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of cells.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you and our listeners.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of the microscopic world.
Keep those minds curious and keep exploring.